7 billion people live on this planet, and almost every single one of them calls it Earth. But if you look at it from above, from the deck of a satellite, from a bird's eye view, or simply through an airplane window, one thing becomes absolutely clear. We've been lied to about the name. This is a planet of water. This is a planet of oceans. 5 vast, merciless, breathtaking water worlds, each one a separate universe with its own personality, its own monsters, its own secrets, and its own beauty that takes your breath away. The Pacific, a majestic giant with no equal in scale. The Atlantic, turbulent and historic, with the fates of entire civilizations woven into its currents. The Indian, warm and mysterious, like an ancient Eastern tale. The Arctic, silent and frozen, guarding secrets humanity is nowhere near uncovering. And the Southern, wild and untamable, the one that still challenges anyone who dares to come close. Today we cover them all. One episode, 5 oceans, 1 planet. And before we dive in, literally, drop a comment below. Which ocean speaks to you the most? The one you dream of seeing, the one you've already stood before, or the one that simply won't leave your mind? I'm genuinely curious. And hey, if a documentary journey around the entire planet in one evening sounds like a great idea, you know what to do with that like button. Let's go.
Ancient, untamable, boundless, alive. The Atlantic Ocean does not divide the planet. It connects it. Stretching from the Arctic ice of Greenland to the Antarctic shelves, it covers 1/5 of the Earth's surface. 106 million years ago, none of this existed, only a scorching rift in the single supercontinent of Pangaea. Since then, that rift has never stopped widening. Slowly, at the pace of a growing fingernail, the ocean pushes its shores apart. And it is doing so today, right now. Its surface area spans more than 106 million square kilometers, a space large enough to swallow North America, South America, and Europe combined, and still have room to spare. Deep within its heart, beneath 3 kilometers of dark water, lies the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a mountain chain 16,000 kilometers long, the invisible spine of the planet. Here, in the Rift Valley, new ocean floor is born, pressed upward from the Earth's interior, in absolute silence and absolute darkness. The Gulf Stream carries the warmth of the tropics to the shores of Scandinavia, heating an entire continent. The cold Labrador Current draws nutrients up from the abyssal depths, feeding fishing grounds that have sustained humanity for millennia. These waters do not stand still. They move in a ceaseless rhythm, like blood through a circulatory system. Each cycle takes 1,000 years, each cycle without pause. The largest animals ever to have existed on Earth live here. Life forms for which sunlight is nothing more than an abstraction hide here. Here, every species is not a separate story, but a thread in a vast and invisible fabric. The Atlantic is not a backdrop for life. It is life itself, and this story is only just beginning. Welcome to the Planet Instinct channel. Put the kettle on. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And let's dive into an extraordinary journey. Imagine a force invisible from the shore. No sound, no splash, only the unstoppable movement of billions of tons of water in a single direction. No sign, no boundary, nothing to betray its presence, only a barely perceptible shift in the color of the water, a little darker, a little bluer, a little warmer. This is the Gulf Stream, and it changes everything. The Gulf Stream is not merely a current, it is a conveyor belt of heat that encircles half the planet. A system without which London would feel like Moscow, Oslo would become an Arctic wasteland, and the vineyards of France would remain nothing more than a dream. It carries more water than all the world's rivers combined, multiplied 100-fold. Its width spans 80 kilometers. Off the coast of Florida, it moves at nearly 10 kilometers per hour. It flows with such relentless persistence that for centuries, sailors used it as a free engine. Traveling north with the Gulf Stream was faster than sailing under canvas. It is born in the tropics. In the warm, sun-soaked waters of the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, the surface layer heats to 30 degrees and begins its journey northward, driven by pressure differences and the rotation of the Earth. The Gulf Stream rounds Cape Hatteras, breaks away from the North American coastline, and surges across the open ocean toward Europe, gradually cooling and splitting into branches. One arm washes the shores of Scandinavia, another flows into the North Sea, and a third curves back and begins the return journey, now as a cold, deep current running along the floor of the Atlantic. It is precisely where the warm waters of the Gulf Stream meet the cold masses of the Labrador Current that an invisible boundary forms, one of the most productive ecological zones on the planet. Cold water, rich in nutrients drawn up from the depths. Warm water, rich in light and heat. Where they collide, they create conditions in which phytoplankton multiplies at extraordinary speed. The Grand Banks of Newfoundland, shallow plateaus to the south of the island, became one of the richest fishing grounds in human history because of this collision of two worlds. For 5 centuries, European fishermen crossed the Atlantic for these waters. Cod was so abundant here that, according to the first colonists, you could scoop it up in a basket. Through these waters moves a creature that knows the Atlantic as no other does. The Atlantic bluefin tuna is the embodiment of speed and endurance in equal measure. Its body, refined by 30 million years of evolution, has achieved a level of hydrodynamic perfection that modern engineers study when designing torpedoes and underwater vehicles. Why change when you are already perfect? Its dark blue back merges with the deep water when viewed from above. Its silver belly dissolves into the diffuse light of the sky when viewed from below. It is invisible from both directions. Perfect camouflage in a world without cover. It can weigh up to 700 kilograms, yet accelerates to 70 kilometers per hour, faster than most land predators. In the water, amid shoals of mackerel or herring, it does not chase its prey. It intercepts it before the prey has time to register what is happening. But its defining quality is not speed. The Atlantic bluefin tuna is a warm-blooded fish. Its body temperature runs several degrees higher than the surrounding water, sustained by a specialized heat exchange system. A network of blood vessels that retains warmth within the muscles. This means its muscles fire faster, its brain reacts more sharply, its responses outpace everything else in the cold water around it. It can dive to 600 meters and return to the warm surface immediately, moving between temperature zones with an ease that confounds physiologists. The Atlantic bluefin tuna is not simply a predator. It is an architect of balance in the upper layers of the ocean. By regulating the populations of mackerel, sardine, herring, and squid, it prevents any single species from overwhelming the ecosystem. Its migrations span the entire Atlantic. It spawns in the warm waters of the Mediterranean and the Gulf of Mexico, and feeds in the cold, productive waters of the north, carrying energy accumulated across thousands of kilometers within a single body. It is a living bridge between the tropics and the poles. Without it, the upper layers of the Atlantic would descend into the chaos of unchecked population explosions. Mid-level fish would graze zooplankton to exhaustion. Zooplankton, in turn, would lose its grip on phytoplankton, and without the balance of phytoplankton, without those cells invisible to the naked eye, responsible for half of all the oxygen on the planet, the composition of the atmosphere begins to shift. The tuna pulls a thread, and that thread reaches into the very air we breathe. But where the tuna moves, something else moves too, something for which the tuna is merely one option among many. In the blue of the open water, at the point where the Gulf Stream begins its crossing of the open ocean, a shadow takes shape, long, unhurried, without urgency. It is in no rush. It has no reason to be. 400 million years. That number is difficult to hold in the mind. When the first sharks appeared, there was not a single tree on Earth. No birds, no dinosaurs, no mammals. The first fish were only beginning to venture onto land. The continents lay in entirely different positions. Since then, the planet has survived 5 mass extinctions, each of which wiped out the majority of existing species. Sharks survived them all. Not merely survived, they remained unchanged. Nature had no need to revise them. The great white shark moves through water the way it moves through time, without visible effort, without hesitation, with the absolute confidence of a creature that has no natural enemies. Its body, up to 6 meters long, cleaves the water with minimal resistance. Its skin is covered in dermal denticles, tiny, tooth-shaped scales aligned with the direction of water flow. They do not merely reduce drag, they generate microvortices that draw water along the body, providing additional thrust. Modern engineers replicate this principle in the surface coatings of Olympic swimsuits. 1 million years of natural engineering in every square centimeter of skin. Its sensory system is unmatched among vertebrates. The lateral line, a canal running the length of its body, detects vibrations and pressure changes in the water. It senses the movement of a wounded fish half a kilometer away. Its nostrils can detect a single drop of blood in a volume of water the size of an Olympic swimming pool. But most remarkable of all are the ampullae of Lorenzini, hundreds of tiny pores on the snout filled with conductive gel. They detect the faintest electrical fields, the bioelectrical activity of the muscles and heart of any living creature in the water. Every animal generates an electrical field. For the great white shark, the ocean is not darkness. It is a luminous map of life. The great white shark hunts differently from most predators. It does not chase its prey. It studies it. It can circle for hours in the depths below a seal colony, watching. It selects the weakened, the careless, the one that has strayed from the group. Only then comes the attack, vertical from below, accelerating a 600-kilogram body to 25 kilometers per hour in seconds. The impact is so powerful that the prey is frequently launched into the air, But the great white shark is not only a killer, it is a regulator. Its mere presence, even without a single hunt, alters the behavior of hundreds of surrounding species. Scientists call this the landscape of fear. Seals know which zones are dangerous and avoid them. This means that the sea urchins on which seals feed in safer areas are left undisturbed. Sea urchins, in turn, keep algae growth in check. Without them, kelp forest would spread without limit. Every behavioral decision a seal makes out of fear of the shark ripples through the entire food web. Wherever sharks were hunted to near extinction, along the U.S. East Coast in the mid-20th century, in the Mediterranean, along stretches of the Atlantic shelf, ecosystems were transformed beyond recognition. Ray populations and other cartilaginous fish exploded without regulation. Rays consumed bivalve mollusks to the point of collapse. Oyster beds that had existed for centuries vanished within a few years. Fishing grounds fell apart. All of it began with the disappearance of the shark, a creature that did nothing more than swim nearby and occasionally hunt. The evolutionary wisdom of the great white shark lies not in strength or speed. It lies in the fact that its presence alone is an ecological instrument. It governs without intervening. It shapes without building. It holds in balance a system in which hundreds of thousands of species find their place, because they know where their freedom ends. Its pectoral fins, wide, unhurried, rise and fall in a rhythm unchanged for 400 million years. It descends into the depths, to where the blue darkens to black, to where its territory ends and something else begins, something for which pressure is not a threat, but a condition of existence. 8,000 meters beneath the waves of the Atlantic, in absolute darkness, in a place no human foot has ever touched, where no ray of light has ever reached and never will, the planet breathes, slowly, continuously, with an effort impossible to measure, yet felt across every surface of the earth above. The mid-Atlantic ridge is the longest mountain chain on the planet. 16,000 kilometers of continuous underwater massif, stretching from the Arctic to the Antarctic, running precisely through the center of the Atlantic Ocean. If the waters were to recede, a mountain system would be revealed, beside which the Himalayas would look like foothills. The peaks of the ridge rise 3 kilometers above the average level of the ocean floor. Yet even they remain hidden under kilometers of water. Only a handful of summits breach the surface, forming the islands of the Azores, Ascension Island, and St. Helena. Here, in the Rift Valley, a canyon several kilometers wide running the entire length of the ridge, the North American Plate and the Eurasian Plate drift apart by 2.5 centimeters every year, the speed of a growing fingernail. It sounds insignificant until you multiply it by 100 million years. This is how, from nothing, the Atlantic Ocean formed. This is how it continues to grow today, and it will keep growing until it has consumed the Pacific. From the cracks in the ocean floor erupt hydrothermal vents, black smokers. Water that has seeped down through fissures in the rock is heated to 400 degrees Celsius and blasts back upward under pressure, saturated with hydrogen sulfide, manganese, iron, and copper. Where this boiling solution meets the cold bottom water, minerals crystallize instantly and settle, building conical towers up to 20 meters tall. They billow black clouds into the darkness, like the chimneys of an underground factory that has been running since the birth of the Earth. No sun, no photosynthesis, nothing that, by any known law, should sustain life. And yet, life here is rampant. Chemosynthetic bacteria convert hydrogen sulfide into organic matter, building the foundation of a food chain without a single photon of light. This discovery, made in 1977 off the Galapagos, overturned biology. It turned out that life does not need the sun. It needs only energy, in whatever form is available. Around the black smokers of the mid-Atlantic ridge live creatures that nature invented from scratch. With no template, no precedent, giant tube worms, Riftia pachyptila, grow up to 2 meters in length. They have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system in any conventional sense. Inside their bodies live billions of chemosynthetic bacteria, converting hydrogen sulfide into organic matter directly within the tissues of the host. The worm is a living reactor, a creature whose symbionts have replaced digestion entirely. This is not parasitism and not a chance arrangement. It is a new form of life. Moving alongside them, a blind shrimp. Rimicaris exoculata. Their eyes have atrophied, but in their place, light-sensitive organs have developed on their backs, responsive to the faint infrared radiation of the hot water. They do not sense light. They sense heat. This allows them to remain as close as possible to the hydrothermal vents, where bacterial concentrations are highest, without being boiled alive. The margin between comfort and death for them is a matter of centimeters. Yeti crabs, octopuses with tissues resistant to hydrogen sulfide, fish with slowed metabolisms that allow them to exist virtually motionless under 300 atmospheres of pressure. Each species here is a separate evolutionary experiment conducted by nature in conditions of total isolation from the rest of the world. The hydrothermal vents of the Atlantic are not merely an ecosystem. They are proof of a principle that rewrote astrobiology. If life is possible here, in a lightless hell, under pressures and temperatures that destroy most organic molecules, then life is possible anywhere there is liquid water and chemical energy. Beneath the ice of Europa, moon of Jupiter, lies a warm interior ocean. On Enceladus, moon of Saturn, geysers erupt through the ice from below. Looking at the black smokers of the Atlantic, scientists do not simply see the ocean floor. They see a blueprint for possible life across the universe. The ridge stretches northward, toward where cold becomes a wall, where water takes on properties that make the impossible ordinary. At the very center of the North Atlantic, roughly where a meridian connects the Bermuda Islands to the Azores, lies a place unlike anywhere else on the planet. A sea without shores, bounded not by land, but by currents. The Gulf Stream to the west, the North Atlantic Current to the north, the Canary Current to the east, the North Equatorial Current to the south. 4 great oceanic conveyors have closed into a ring, and sealed within it a still, near motionless, separate world, the Sargasso Sea. For centuries, this place terrified sailors. Calm water in the heart of the Atlantic felt like a trap. Legends spoke of ships permanently ensnared in weed, condemned to circle forever. Columbus, in his journals, describes the anxiety of his crew at the sight of green carpets spreading across the open ocean. In reality, the seaweed is not dense enough to halt a vessel, but the psychological effect was very real. The surface of the Sargasso Sea is covered in freely drifting brown algae. sargassum. Unattached to the ocean floor, it forms floating islands ranging from a few square meters to several hectares. These are the only seaweeds in the world to complete their entire life cycle in the open ocean, never once touching a shore or the seabed. Air-filled bladders, pneumatocysts, keep them buoyant, creating floating platforms that neither sink nor drift in a single direction, but slowly rotate with the circular currents. Within these underwater jungles lives a community found nowhere else on Earth. The sargassum fish, histrio, does not look like a fish. Its body is covered in flaps and filaments that perfectly mimic the shape and color of sargassum fronds. Its fins have become something resembling hands. It literally walks through the weed, gripping as it goes. Its mouth snaps open in a fraction of a second, creating a vacuum that pulls in prey before it can react. This creature has adapted so completely to the sargassum that it cannot survive without it. Young loggerhead turtles, caretta, hatch on Atlantic beaches in Florida and the Caribbean, and instinctively head out into the open ocean. No one taught them this. No one showed them the way. They navigate to the Sargasso Sea on their own, guided by a magnetic sense that reads the Earth's field with the precision of a navigation instrument. Here, sheltered within the floating mats of weed, they spend the first years of their lives, invisible to most predators, hidden in green labyrinths. This period is known as the lost years of the loggerhead turtle. For a long time, scientists had no idea where hatchlings disappeared to after leaving the beach. The sargassum was their refuge. But the greatest secret of the Sargasso Sea is one the European eel kept for millennia. For centuries, fishermen caught eels in the rivers and lakes of Europe, fat, mature, fully grown. But no one had ever seen an eel's egg. No one had ever seen an eel larvae. No one knew how they reproduced. Aristotle believed eels were spontaneously generated from river mud. In medieval Europe, this was accepted as fact. Only in the early 20th century did the Danish biologist Johannes Schmidt methodically comb the Atlantic, measuring eel larvae, leptocephaly, and moving toward ever smaller specimens. The trail led him to the Sargasso Sea. Each autumn, mature eels leave the rivers and lakes of Europe and America. They stop eating. Their eyes enlarge, adapting to the darkness of the deep. Their bodies accumulate fat, the only fuel for a journey of 3,000 kilometers, non-stop and without food. They cross the Atlantic, descend to depths of several hundred meters above the Sargasso Sea, spawn, and die. Their larvae, transparent as glass, rise to the surface and drift eastward with the Gulf Stream for 2 to 3 years. On reaching European shores, they transform into glass eels and enter the rivers. The cycle closes. The Sargasso Sea is not merely an ecosystem, it is a crossroads, a hub connecting the freshwater rivers of Europe with the middle of the Atlantic. Without it, the eel will vanish. Without the eel, river ecosystems will collapse from Spain to Scandinavia. The eel is a keystone predator of the benthic layer in most European rivers. The thread stretching from a German river to the Sargasso is one of the longest and most invisible threads in nature. To the north of the quiet Sargasso, the Atlantic changes character. The sky darkens, the wind builds, the water grows colder with every degree of latitude. There, where day lasts half a year and night the other half, life has found ways to turn extremity into advantage. The North Atlantic in winter is a trial with few equals on the surface of the planet. Winds at 100 kilometers per hour shear the crests of waves and scatter them into white foam that flies horizontally. Air temperatures drop to 20 below zero. 20-meter waves are not the exception. They are the norm. Fishing vessels have vanished here without trace. Oil platforms have lost equipment in a single storm night. This is a place where humanity arrived last and leaves first. Yet it is precisely this brutality that creates the conditions that govern the climate of the entire Northern Hemisphere. Winter winds chill the surface waters of the North Atlantic to their limit. Cold, dense, salt-laden water is heavier than warm water. It sinks, not a slow drift. It falls, plunging to depths of 2 to 3 kilometers in a relatively short span. And then begins a slow southward journey. Along the Atlantic floor, toward the equator, curving around it and continuing into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. There, after centuries, it slowly rises again, warming and returns northward along the surface. One complete cycle of this global conveyor belt takes 1,000 years. This phenomenon, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, is one of the planet's primary thermostats. It carries tropical heat toward the poles. It drives nutrients from the ocean floor to the surface. It regulates the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Should this circulation weaken, and modern measurements show it has already slowed compared to the mid-20th century, the climate of Europe will change rapidly and irreversibly. Britain, at the same latitude, would begin to resemble Labrador climatically. Winters would lengthen. Monsoons would shift. The savannas of West Africa would dry out. In these waters, amid the storms and the spray, with the absolute composure of a creature for which a storm is not a threat, but simply an ordinary environment, the humpback whale feeds. Its appearance at the surface is a sight that defies description. A body 15 meters long and 30 tons in weight rises from the water in a slow, arching leap, and crashes back down with a boom and an eruption of white water, audible kilometers away. Breaching the full launch from the water, humpbacks perform again and again, sometimes for hours. Why? Scientists still disagree. Long-distance communication, dislodging whale lice, a display of strength, or perhaps simply because they can. The songs of the humpback whale are among the most complex acoustic phenomena in nature. Males sing without pause for hours, continuously evolving and elaborating their melodies. All males within a single ocean basin sing the same version of a song, and it changes collectively, like a living culture. New phrases coined by one male are taken up by others and spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean faster than chance alone could explain. This is not instinct. This is learning. This is culture. The humpback whale feeds by a method with no precise parallel in nature. Bubble net feeding is a complex cooperative hunt requiring coordination, learning, and what appears to be a division of roles. A group of several whales dives beneath a dense shoal of herring or capelin. One or more begin to circle, exhaling through their blowholes. The bubbles rise in a cylindrical curtain, a kind of net. The fish instinctively refuse to cross this barrier, compressing into a tight ball. At that moment, the whales surge upward from below with open mouths, and each lunge yields tons of food. This technique is passed on to calves. Individual groups have developed their own variations. This is hunting with a tradition. But the humpback whale is not only a hunter and a singer, it is a pump. Its excrement, rich in iron and nitrogen, rises to the surface in clouds of nutrients that stimulate the growth of phytoplankton. A single whale produces enough nutrients in a year to sustain the growth of plankton that locks away thousands of tons of carbon. When a whale dies, its body sinking to the sea floor, it feeds deep-sea communities for decades. Scientists call this slow gift a whale fall, one of the most important mechanisms for transferring carbon from the atmosphere into the ocean depths. The whale does not merely live in the Atlantic, it participates in the Atlantic's breathing. From the polar storms, we descend to where storms never reach, where in place of fury, absolute silence, where pressure of hundreds of atmospheres is not an obstacle, but a condition of life. At a depth of 1,000 meters, sunlight does not exist. It has never been here. Not a single photon in all the time this water has occupied this place, and that is centuries. The temperature is around 2 degrees above zero. The pressure is 100 atmospheres. There is no cycle of day and night, no seasons, nothing but an endless, unvarying, absolute darkness and movement, because this abyss is not dead. It is full. The deep scattering layer, the daily vertical migration, is one of the most vast daily events on the planet and one of the least known. Every evening, with the onset of darkness, hundreds of billions of creatures rise from the depths toward the surface. Zooplankton, small crustaceans, small fish, squid. For a few hours they feed in the phytoplankton-rich surface waters, and at dawn they descend again into the protective darkness away from predators that see in the light. This vertical pendulum, 200 meters up at night, 200 meters down by day, is one of the primary mechanisms by which carbon is transferred from the surface into the depths. Creatures absorb carbon at the top and release it in the form of waste below. Billions of small bodies every single day carry carbon to the bottom. Through this world moves the sperm whale, the largest toothed predator on Earth. A male can reach 20 meters in length and 50 tons in weight. And every 2 hours, it dives into the abyss. Its body withstands pressure that would crush most metal structures. Its lungs, filled with air before the dive, collapse under pressure. This is not catastrophe, but salvation. Collapse prevents nitrogen narcosis, which would be fatal to any human diver. The sperm whale's blood contains 8 times more myoglobin than human blood, meaning its muscles hold a colossal reserve of oxygen. The heartbeat slows. Blood flow is redirected to the brain and heart. Non-essential organs shut down. It remains submerged for up to 90 minutes. It hunts the giant squid, a creature that humanity knew for centuries only through indirect evidence. 3-meter tentacles recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales, sucker rings 10 centimeters in diameter that left scars in the whale's skin. The first authenticated photograph of a living giant squid was taken only in 2004, the first video in 2012. Before that, it existed as reality only for sperm whales. The giant squid reaches 13 meters in length. Its eyes, the size of a football, are the largest of any living creature on the planet, 30 centimeters in diameter. They are tuned to detect the faintest bioluminescent glimmer in absolute darkness, the flicker of plankton, disturbed by the movement of a sperm whale, gives the squid a few seconds warning. It reacts instantly. With a jet of water expelled from its mantle cavity, launching itself into the darkness. The confrontation between sperm whale and giant squid takes place at depths of 500 to 3,000 meters, in complete darkness, under pressure that would kill most forms of life. No one has ever witnessed it directly. Its testimony is written in scars, on the skin of sperm whales, circular sucker marks 10 centimeters across. The squid fights back. It does not yield without a struggle. Sometimes it wins. Bioluminescence in the depths of the Atlantic is not a rarity or an exotic feature. Scientists estimate that more than 70% of all deep-sea species produce their own light. The anglerfish, Melanostus johnsoni, carries a glowing lure on a long filament projecting from its head, a lantern dangling in front of a mouth. Any creature drawn to that light in the absolute darkness finds itself within reach of jaws lined with inward angled teeth, making escape impossible. It is a trap disguised as hope. The sperm whale returns to the surface. Its blowhole opens with a deep exhalation, a column of vapor in the cold air. It carries within it the nutrients of the abyss and surrenders them to the surface. Every surfacing is a bridge between two worlds. Far to the west, there is a shore, a place where the Atlantic breaks against a rock, where the deep meets the shallows, and the most productive boundary zone on the planet is born. Where the Atlantic breaks against rock, a zone begins that rivals tropical rainforests in its biological density. This is the intertidal zone, a strip of coastline that is flooded by the ocean twice a day and twice a day laid bare to the air and sun. Neither land nor sea. A space between worlds, brutal and extraordinarily generous in equal measure. The creatures that live here face a challenge that any engineer would call unsolvable, survive in conditions that change completely every 6 hours. Total submersion in salt water, total exposure, wave impacts carrying pressure of several tons per square meter, the heat of midsummer, the frost of a winter night. For most organisms, a single one of these factors would be lethal. Here, they all occur simultaneously, and yet life is here, in every crack, in every rock pool, beneath every stone. Atlantic herring gather in shoals, numbering several billion individuals. This is one of the largest assemblies of vertebrate animals on the planet. When such a shoal moves near the surface, it is visible from the air. A dark, pulsing cloud beneath the water, shifting shape with a precision that would put a ballet corps to shame. This phenomenon, a murmuration beneath the waves, has no leader, no commander, no orders. Each individual fish responds only to the movement of its 7 nearest neighbors. From these simple local rules emerges a complex collective behavior that baffles predators. No shark, no tuna can fix on a single target within a shimmering, unstoppable mass. Herring is the foundation. Everything rests on it. Puffins, gannets, seals, dolphins, large tuna, sharks, white-tailed eagles. Remove the herring, and the entire structure of the coastal ecosystem collapses. It converts plankton into accessible energy. It feeds everyone. Off the shores of Newfoundland, Iceland, Scotland, and Norway, millions of puffins gather in colonies. This bird defies nature twice over. It flies like a bird, swims like a fish, and walks upright like a penguin. Underwater, The puffin rose with its wings, not its feet. It literally flies through the water, reaching depths of 60 meters in pursuit of fast-moving fish. Its beak is a subject of study in its own right. Outwardly comical, it is lined with rows of backward-facing spines on the palate and tongue. This allows the puffin to hold fish already caught while opening its beak to catch more. The world record stands at 62 fish held in a single beak at once. This is not a metaphor for skilled hunting. It is a feat of mechanical engineering shaped by millions of years of selection pressure in a world where every dive comes at a significant energetic cost. The gray seal hauls out onto land to rest and breed, and returns to the water to live. Its diving physiology is a marvel. The heart slows from 150 beats per minute to 4. The diving reflex, reducing the oxygen consumption of the entire body. Blood saturated with myoglobin becomes a reservoir, sustaining the brain and heart while the lungs are empty. Non-essential organs shut down. Only what is strictly necessary remains active. This is not an adaptation to the environment. It is a transformation of all physiology. Every dive is a small death from which the seal returns. The gray seal bridges the deep and the shore. Its excrement, rich in nutrients, fertilizes coastal waters, just as the whale fertilizes the open ocean. Its body, when it dies and sinks, feeds deep-sea communities for years. Nothing is lost. Everything becomes something else. Here, at the boundary of water and land, all the threads of the Atlantic converge. The warmth of the Gulf Stream, carried from the tropics, nutrients raised from the abyss, energy that passed through plankton, fish, and seal, and returned to the water. The Atlantic does not separate the shore from the deep. It connects them. It connects everything. The Gulf Stream carries warmth to where? Without it, there would be only permafrost. The humpback whale fertilizes waters without which plankton could not produce oxygen. The great white shark shapes the behavior of everything that moves around it. The sperm whale carries the abyss to the surface, and the surface to the abyss. Hydrothermal vents prove that life does not need the sun. The Sargasso eel connects the rivers of Europe to the middle of the ocean with a thread 3,000 kilometers long. Herring converts plankton into energy for all. The gray seal dies and feeds those it never knew. There are no incidental details here, no redundant participants, no species that can be removed without consequence. Each one is a thread, and every thread holds the entire fabric. The Atlantic is the youngest of the great oceans. At just 106 million years old, it is an infant by the standards of the planet. It is still growing, still expanding, still shaping itself. And while it does, it shapes the climate, feeds continents, regulates the atmosphere, and creates new forms of life in the darkness of its own depths. It breathes. And while it breathes, so do we.
Pacific, not so peaceful. Pacific means peaceful, calm, serene, take your pick. Don't be fooled. The Pacific Ocean is a dangerous world. Death lurks around every corner, and life pushes its limits into places common sense would never dare go. You can't trust your eyes here, and honestly, not your ears either. That rock on the seafloor? It's probably already sizing you up. That empty stretch of blue water, packed with life, edge to edge, and most of it is thinking about one thing: what to eat next. This is where titans collide, because apparently they've run out of room and forgotten how to settle things on land. 167 million square kilometers, 1/3 of the entire surface of our planet, the biggest, deepest, and arguably the most badly behaved ocean on Earth. It existed long before us, got along just fine without us for several billion years, and has absolutely no intention of adjusting to our expectations now. A place where nature has never heard the word enough, and certainly never learned the word mercy. Welcome to the Planet Instinct channel. Drop a like, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and how far you are from this extraordinary ocean. Every winter, humpback whales complete a 4,000-kilometer journey through cold northern waters and arrive in the warm seas of Hawaii. The trip is grueling, but the destination is worth it, at least from an evolutionary standpoint. This is a rare break from their otherwise solitary lives. A kind of annual reunion, only underwater, with no dress code, no agenda, and far more serious consequences for anyone who doesn't fit in with the crowd. They gather to mate. Adult males outnumber females because nature, as always, made sure life would never feel too easy or predictable. Every male wants to stay close to a female because when she's ready to mate, the nearest candidate has the best shot. The logic is brutal and simple. Be there, don't blow it, look convincing, and make sure no one else does the same thing at the same time. But staying close means fighting off the largest uninvited guests on the planet. And so begins the brutal spectacle known as the competitive group, which sounds like the name of a failed direct-to-video thriller, but in reality is louder, bigger, and wetter than any blockbuster. The ocean surface literally boils. Waves fan out for hundreds of meters in every direction. Testosterone-fueled males go all in for the coveted escort position. They ram rivals with their bodies, thrash with their tails, breach and crash back down, hoping to impress, or at least accidentally land on a competitor. One male releases a burst of bubbles, sending an unmistakable message. Strangers are not welcome here. A 40-ton sign language that everyone understands without a translator. The rivalry escalates, and what began as courtship gradually becomes a battle of living torpedoes, each one weighing as much as a small house. The water churns, tails strike with explosive force, and spray flies dozens of meters into the air. Finally, one male overpowers his rival and drives him away. The winner returns to his female, a little battered, clearly exhausted, but with an undeniable edge. Still, it's too early to celebrate. This is just one fight out of dozens. Other males remain, other contenders with other ambitions. The game has only just begun, and there is no intermission in this theater. If any creature has seen the Pacific as it was millions of years ago, it's the green sea turtle. It has lived on this earth for more than 100 million years. Think about that. Dinosaurs rose and vanished. The turtle remained. Continents drifted to their current positions. The turtle remained. Ice ages came and went. The turtle remained. Humanity invented plastic and enthusiastically threw it into the ocean. The turtle is coping. Not without difficulty, but coping. Every few years, females make one of the most remarkable journeys in the animal kingdom. They return to the exact beach where they were born. Not a similar beach, not a nearby island somewhere in the vicinity, the exact same beach, with precision that would put any navigation device to shame. Thousands of kilometers across open ocean, guided by Earth's magnetic field, a built-in compass that never needs a software update and never runs out of battery. Upon reaching shore, the female crawls onto land under cover of darkness, laboriously digs a nest, lays up to 100 eggs, and returns to the sea. No parental leave, no lullabies, no nursery. Just the beach, the moon, the stars, and the hope that predators won't find the nest before the eggs hatch. Of 100 eggs, only a handful will survive to adulthood. The rest will be eaten, washed away, or swept off by ocean currents. The Pacific is kind to turtles exactly as much as it is kind to everything else, which is to say, strictly on its own terms. But the turtle doesn't give up. It swims, slowly, serenely, with the dignity of a creature that has survived nearly everything. As if it decided long ago that panic is a waste of energy, and patience is the best survival strategy. And judging by 100 million years of flawless track record, it was absolutely right. Across the Pacific, males fight for the right to reproduce, and humpback whales are far from the only, or even the most fearsome, contestants in this ancient tournament. On the remote tropical island of Palawan, hidden beneath the shade of palms and mangroves in shallow water, prehistoric giants lie in wait. They conceal bodies up to 6 meters long and weighing nearly 1 ton among shadows, seaweed, and river mud, completely still, completely patient, completely certain they own this place. They know it, and so does everyone else. Saltwater crocodiles are deeply and fundamentally territorial animals. If they had business cards, they would read, "My territory. Everything around it, also my territory. Questions? See Rule 1. The largest males enforce dominance with their iron jaws. Simultaneously, their resume, their value system, their court of law, and their enforcement mechanism. They do not accept appeals. There are no recorded acquittals. For subordinate males, the only career move is to challenge the reigning king. That sounds heroic. In reality, it looks like 2 armored machines in very bad moods colliding head-on. 2 creatures with a bite force measured in tons settle the question of who is tougher, through direct experimentation. This particular large male got lucky. He walked away with wounds but kept his dignity. The young males, though, have it rough. Dominant males are perfectly capable of simply eating them for lunch. No malice involved, just a convenient snack in the right place at the right time. Fewer than 1% of young crocodiles reach maturity. That is the brutal statistic nature compiled long before statistics existed as a science. So if this young male has a future, it is definitely not here, not now, and not under this particular tree. And so begins a migration, one of the rarest observed and last understood by scientists. In a single day, he can cover more than 16 kilometers, riding tides and currents like free public transit. The journey takes weeks. A tour with no guide, no insurance, no map, and no guarantee of a safe arrival. Saltwater crocodiles navigate ocean tides and currents with extraordinary skill, an ancient ability honed over millions of years, long before GPS or seafaring. But they are not built for continuous swimming. When the current turns against him, he simply gives in, turns broadside to the waves, and rests. A philosophical response worthy of a one-ton Zen master. Many reptiles can sleep with one half of their brain at a time, left and right hemispheres taking shifts like overnight watchmen. A natural multitasking mode that any overworked middle manager would envy. He can hold his breath for up to an hour, a record achieved without any particular training regimen. Specialized glands on his tongue steadily flush excess salt from his body. With a slow metabolism, he can go weeks without eating, turning his journey into something between a marathon and a meditation retreat. He needs to avoid danger, find new waters, survive the open ocean, and, if everything falls into place, one day become the next king. Luck is rare in the Pacific, but sometimes, just sometimes, it happens. But not all islands of the Pacific are welcoming, even compared to crocodile-infested Palawan, where at least you know what to fear and which direction it's coming from. Bikini Atoll looks like a postcard from paradise, an idyllic ring of white sand, impossibly blue water, palm trees swaying in a warm breeze. Exactly the kind of place you'd want to disappear to and never leave. Unless you know what lies beneath that shamelessly beautiful surface. Brutal wreckage and several decades of decisions humanity prefers not to think about before bed. The aircraft carrier Saratoga was the pride of the U.S. Navy during World War II. A biography that would make any Hollywood screenwriter envious. 2 torpedo strikes, 4 bomb explosions, and 6 kamikaze attacks, and she survived every one. Now she rests on the floor of Bikini Lagoon, one grave among many. The others were sunk not by war. They were used as test subjects in experiments that future generations would describe with barely concealed horror and very carefully concealed shame. After World War II, 23 nuclear weapons were detonated here. Because Bikini Atoll was a speck in a forgotten corner of the ocean, and that made it the perfect test site. Military logic. If no one is really watching, anything goes. The local residents were evacuated in advance with a promise they'd soon return home. They are still waiting. Promises, it turns out, also have a half-life. 6 decades later, Stanford University biologist Dr. Steve Palumbi is studying how Bikini has recovered from what it endured. A 15-megaton hydrogen bomb left a crater here, a scar on the body of the ocean and the planet, visible from space, an indelible reminder. Nature, as usual, stubbornly refuses to accept defeat. The crater walls stand, corals grow, fish swim. But this raises far more questions than it answers, and the most important of those questions remains unanswered. World superpowers are not the only giants picking fights in the Pacific. Nature developed its own program long ago, far more diverse, far more inventive, and requiring no budget or treaties. In the China Sea, a scrap of land called Shadow Island drifts along quietly. It was once part of the mainland, but broke off and ended up alone, like the colleague who didn't get invited to the party and has been quietly nursing a grudge ever since, making up its own rules as it goes. Its name means Snake Island, and that is not poetry, not metaphor, and not tourist exaggeration. 20,000 rattlesnakes on one island, with no alternative food source for most of the year. All summer they go hungry, conserve energy, and sleep until autumn, patient, silent, cold-blooded in every sense of the word, waiting their turn with the composure of a seasoned professional hunter. When millions of songbirds migrate south from Siberia, the island is scheduled as a rest stop. The birds don't read warning signs, they don't consult danger maps. They are exhausted from thousands of kilometers of flight, they are hungry, they need to rest, and they happily land on the nearest available branch, which, as a rule, is already occupied by something with very sharp teeth and very fast reflexes. At dawn, the snakes take their positions. Every branch, every bush, every ledge and clump of grass becomes a hunting platform. An unassuming twig by the trail? Perfect. A nondescript bough over the water? That'll do. The only thing that matters is being where the birds will fly and not missing the moment. The island becomes one enormous restaurant with a very limited menu, very hungry waitstaff, and a strict self-service policy for all guests. Digesting one bird takes several days, but to make the most of this rare and brief opportunity, the snakes swallow 1 to 3 birds in a row, one after another, without pausing, without sentiment, without remorse. The window when food is literally falling from the sky is so short that hunting goes on day and night. 2 weeks of a deadly conveyor belt. Take position at dawn, wait for a bird, strike, digest, repeat. By the time the migration resumes and the birds fly north, the island's residents are so full they look ready to burst. They will spend the winter in blissful stillness, motionless, satisfied, patient, until next autumn, until the next flock arrives, until the next time millions of winged travelers pass over the island, completely unaware. History repeats itself, because nobody warns the birds in advance. Lembeh Strait, Indonesia. In other hotspots across the Pacific, death is a harsh daily reality, not a topic for philosophical debate. In the Lembeh Strait, a strong and constant current prevents proper reefs from forming. Hardly ideal conditions, you might think. Yet life here doesn't just thrive. It shoves, shouts, waves its arms, and occupies every available inch of space. Thousands of species compete for food and territory in a waterway roughly 500 meters wide. The current forces most creatures to live on the bottom or just above it. Imagine taking every resident of a skyscraper, moving them to the ground floor, locking the elevators, cutting the Wi-Fi, and then giving each neighbor official permission to eat any other neighbor. Cozy? Not exactly, but evolutionarily speaking, quite productive. This creates an arms race where nobody intends to finish last, or even second to last. Competition is so intense that the inhabitants of Lembeh Strait have developed astonishing strategies for hunting, defense, and camouflage, a masterclass in applied cunning written by millions of years of practice with no editor. Take the frogfish. Its fins have evolved into something vaguely resembling legs, already strange enough to earn its own paragraph in any zoology textbook. But that's just the opening act. The frogfish's true talent is camouflage so perfect it literally dissolves into a matching sponge and vanishes in plain sight. Then it simply waits. An hour, 2, however long it takes. Patience, it turns out, is also a weapon, and one of the most effective ones available. The warty frogfish has developed its own method of survival, no less elaborate. It takes shelter among the venomous spines of fire urchins and gradually becomes dark and spiky itself, a suit of armor tailored from someone else's threat. But there's more. Once hidden, it deploys a lure, a worm-like appendage that sways gently in the current, soft and seemingly harmless. A curious fish draws closer for a better look. What happens next is very fast and very bad for the curious fish. The carrier crab solved the problem of personal security from a completely different angle, with a frankly impressive degree of audacity. Why spend years developing your own defenses when you can borrow someone else's right now? A specialized claw carefully picks up a sea urchin from below, neatly avoiding its venomous spines with surgical precision. Now the crab carries its deeply unhappy hostage everywhere it goes, and predators wisely choose to keep their distance. The system works flawlessly. The urchin, by all appearances, strongly disagrees with that assessment, but no one asked for its opinion. If competition truly breeds excellence, then the Lembe Strait is excellent to the point of death, in the most literal sense of the word. The Ring of Fire. The Pacific is encircled by the Ring of Fire, a grand arc of geological fury stretching 40,000 kilometers, home to 3/4 of all active volcanoes on Earth. More than 450 points where the planet's crust decides to let off steam, sometimes literally, sometimes with catastrophic consequences for anyone who happens to be nearby. This seismic fury is driven by the relentless fracturing of Earth's largest tectonic plate, the Pacific Plate. The planet is methodically dismantling itself, simply because it can. And because 4 billion years of uninterrupted practice give you certain rights. The volcanic belt can obliterate life in an instant and create it from nothing where nothing existed before. Nature mastered this paradox long ago and applies it with obvious enjoyment, offering no explanation. White Island, New Zealand. 48 kilometers off the coast of New Zealand, far enough to admire, close enough to worry, sits White Island. It is the summit of an underwater volcano that has been continuously active for 150,000 years. It rumbles, smokes, shudders periodically, and has no apparent plans to settle down anytime soon. Cracks in the crater walls, known as fumaroles, exhale hot sulfurous gas with the force of a jet engine, leaving behind toxic yellow deposits that, in any other context, might be called artistic. The crater lake bubbles at 50 degrees Celsius and is at least 10 times more acidic than pure vinegar. Not a resort, not even close. And yet the island has inhabitants, which is remarkable enough to give anyone pause. Extremophiles, primitive microbes for whom uninhabitable conditions sounds like an ideal address and a great marketing tagline. They neutralize acid, complete their entire life cycle in an environment that would instantly destroy any other organism, and appear entirely content with the arrangement. They need neither oxygen in conventional concentrations, nor a neutral pH, nor heat within reasonable limits. About 4 billion years ago, when Earth looked roughly as bleak and toxic as White Island on a bad day, the first life on this planet looked a lot like these microbes. Perhaps for them, this island is not hell, not a trial, just a small corner of home, a reminder of where it all began. Nostalgia for the beginning of everything. Devil's Island, Taiwan. Devil's Island sits at the junction of two tectonic plates, and it wears its name with full justification. Beneath its milky white surface lies a labyrinth of hydrothermal vents pumping superheated water at 116 degrees Celsius, a temperature at which water doesn't just boil, but does so with particular enthusiasm. Above the surface, sulfurous gases vent continuously, wrapping the island in a dense, toxic haze. By any reasonable standard, this is one of the most toxic places on the planet. Nobody put out a welcome mat, and yet, someone lives here. Sulfur crabs have settled along the very edges of the hydrothermal vents in water that has cooled just enough not to boil, but remains lethally toxic to anything else brave or foolish enough to try. Over millions of years, they developed a unique biochemical ability to neutralize sulfuric acid, an evolutionary patent issued to no one else, and apparently with no plans for wider distribution. But the most remarkable thing is that they don't just survive in this dead zone, they actively exploit it with the entrepreneurial drive of a successful startup. The toxic gases rising from the vents instantly kill any plankton that drifts too close. The dead plankton slowly sinks like marine snow, a free, endless, unclaimed delicacy falling straight from the ceiling of hell. The flattened tips of the crab's claws are evolutionarily optimized for harvesting exactly this resource. They live in hell and feed on what hell kills. A flawless business model. The Pacific and its guardian, the albatross. If the turtle is the Pacific's elder and chronicler, the albatross is its eternal wanderer, its tireless messenger, and arguably the most seasoned traveler of any living creature on the planet. This magnificent seabird, with a wingspan of up to 3.5 meters, is capable of going years without landing. Not weeks, not months, years. Young albatrosses leave the nest, and until they reach sexual maturity, for 5 to 10 years, they simply fly over the Pacific. They sleep in the air. They eat on the wing, diving to the surface for fish and squid. They live airborne. Land is simply of no interest to them during this period, and it shows. The albatross has mastered one of the most energy-efficient flight techniques in nature, dynamic soaring. It glides downwind to build speed, then wheels sharply and climbs, catching a rising air current, and repeats this endlessly, effortlessly. In a single day, an albatross can cover more than 1,000 kilometers without making a single active wing beat. The Pacific is not an obstacle for it to overcome. It is home, a runway with no beginning and no end, a road that goes on forever. But even the eternal wanderer eventually comes home. Albatrosses live up to 70 years, a record among seabirds. They mate for life, returning each year to the same islands, finding the same partner among thousands of others, and performing the same elaborate courtship dance, bowing, bill clapping, calling and moving in complex synchronized patterns refined through years of shared practice. The most loyal partner among birds, the most experienced navigator in the world, and living proof that the Pacific, for all its cruelty, knows how to take care of its own. Hangzhou Bay, China. In China, Even people have learned to draw advantage from the Pacific's fierce and unpredictable character. Though it sometimes requires considerable nerve, thick walls, and a readiness for the ocean to occasionally remind everyone who is actually in charge. Hangzhou Bay eagerly awaits the return of its famous visitor every year. Temples were built to honor it, pagodas to appease it, legends to remember it. For centuries, it was known as the Silver Dragon, a wall of water predictable by the calendar, but always potentially devastating. The largest tidal bore in the world. Unlike tsunamis, which are triggered by sudden earthquakes without warning, the Silver Dragon arrives on schedule, summoned by the lunar cycle. The bay gradually narrows from its mouth inward. The wave builds, compresses, accelerates, and does not stop. More than 9 meters high, rushing at 40 kilometers per hour, it drives up the Qiantang River straight toward Hangzhou, a city of 6 million people. An immovable structure against an unstoppable force. A match that repeats every year, and every time the dragon arrives full of resolve. To tame this phenomenon, the Chinese built the first seawall as far back as the 10th century, an engineering solution developed long before modern hydrodynamics existed. The wall built in the 17th century during the Qing dynasty still stands and protects the city today. Still, 5 people die on average each year. The dragon always claims its share wherever it finds an opening, and it does not concede defeat easily. Today, a handful of spectacularly reckless surfers dare to ride it. On the Qiantang River, some of the most extreme competitions in the world take place. In a sport where most rides last seconds, the dragon's back offers a surfer a terrifying 20 minutes atop a living wall of water. Only the skilled and the lucky survive. The rest gain invaluable life experience, if they live long enough to appreciate it. Bikini Atoll, the return. After 23 nuclear tests during the Cold War era, the soil of Bikini Atoll is officially classified as a radioactive contamination zone. The air is breathable, swimming is possible, but living here is out of the question. Not as a recommendation, but as a medical fact. Nature, of course, knows nothing of this prohibition, has no interest in knowing, and continues its work with the same composure it maintained before nuclear weapons existed, during their testing and after, without pause, without doubt, without a press release. Dr. Steve Palumbi of Stanford is studying how the island is recovering. People have tried to return and cannot. Radiation has seeped into everything: the soil, the water, the plants, the animals. Every plant on Bikini is saturated with cesium-137, an isotope with a well-earned and enduring reputation. Eating what grows here can be lethal. Coconuts, in particular, carry the highest levels of radioactive contamination on the entire island. The coconut crab, however, has not been informed of any of this. Nobody told it. It simply eats coconuts, with visible enjoyment, with admirable consistency, and without the slightest sign of concern. It has long since become radioactive itself, accumulating the isotope in its tissues generation after generation. The crabs were wiped out during the blasts, but the coconut crab releases its eggs into the open ocean. Larvae develop far from the island in relatively clean water, and then some of them return to shore to begin the cycle again, quietly accumulating invisible traces of human recklessness. Most of the marine life at Bikini has nonetheless returned, and that in itself is remarkable. The reefs are thriving, fish go about their business, and sharks patrol the waters as a sign of a healthy, functioning ecosystem. But something is clearly not right. Some nurse sharks here swim with one dorsal fin instead of two.
Mutation? A consequence of radiation?
A strange coincidence? I've never seen anything like it anywhere else, says Palumbi. And that means we have a very important scientific mystery to solve. How much damage can we inflict on the Pacific before it stops coming back to us? In altered forms, in unexpected shapes, in mutant sharks and radioactive crabs. That too is a mystery. And judging by what we already know, we probably won't like the answer. Life on the ruins of cruelty. The Mitsubishi Interceptor, a Japanese military aircraft, once one of the most deadly fighters over the Pacific. Thousands of these machines lie on the ocean floor, from the Coral Sea to Tokyo, from Guadalcanal to the Mariana Islands. Rusted, blanketed in algae and coral, monuments to decisions best not revisited alone in the dark. Now, instead of taking life, they create it. They have become artificial reefs, noisy, overcrowded apartment buildings for all manner of residents. Clownfish claim the best cabins. Coral trout patrol the outer perimeter. Anemones settle by the entrances. Shrimp dart through the corridors. Nobody asked their permission to move into this address, but everyone seems perfectly settled and has no plans to leave. In time, the metal will corrode and disappear, giving way to a mass of coral and sponge that retains, like a distant echo, the silhouette of the aircraft. Nature does not erase shapes. It simply changes what fills them. The Pacific is recovering, slowly, reluctantly, in its own way, without ceremony or press conferences, but recovering. And on the ruins of everything most brutal that ever happened here, on the wreckage of wars, nuclear tests, evolutionary battles, and human mistakes, life spreads without exception. Because that is simply how this ocean works. Not peaceful, not calm, not merciful, but alive, to the last drop of water, to the last meter of depth, to the last creature that found a way to survive here.
Picture this. December 26th, 2004. Morning. A beach. Tourists taking photos, children running along the waterline, fishermen sorting their nets, the smell of salt and fried fish, music playing somewhere in the distance. An ordinary morning at the edge of the world, one of thousands that came before it, and should have been thousands more to follow. And then, the ocean pulls back, just retreats as if drawing a long breath before something enormous. Fish flop on the wet sand, mouths opening and closing uselessly. People laugh, point, pull out their phones to film it. Someone walks closer to get a better look at the fish. Nobody understands what it means. Nobody, except those who will never survive to explain it. Within minutes, a wall of water the height of a 9-story building will hit the shore at the speed of a jet aircraft. 227,000 people, 14 countries, one ocean, the Indian Ocean. Welcome to the warmest, youngest,
and most unpredictable of all Earth's oceans, where beauty and catastrophe share the same water, breathe the same air, sleep in the same bed, and never warn you in advance. The first myth that needs to be dismantled right now before it has time to take hold. The Indian Ocean is not some small third option, not the little brother nobody takes seriously. Yes, it ranks third by size, but 70 million square kilometers is nearly 2 Asian continents placed side by side. Its waters wash the shores of 57 nations. 1/3 of humanity lives along its coasts, nearly 2.5 billion people. No other ocean feeds this many people at once, serves as home to this many cultures, or weaves together this many languages, religions, and fates in a single space. None. But here is what is truly strange and difficult to wrap your head around the first time. It has no northern exit. It is locked in. To the north, nothing but land. India, Pakistan, the Arabian Peninsula, Iran. That entire massive wall of Earth. This is the only ocean on the planet that does not reach the Arctic, that does not connect to the North Pole. An enclosed basin of enormous proportions, with its own weather, its own currents, its own rules, its own character. It is like a room with 3 walls instead of 4. Air moves differently. Heat accumulates differently. Life develops by entirely different rules that apply nowhere else on Earth. And this changes everything. From the weather over Mumbai to the rice harvest in Bangladesh, from the strength of cyclones to the depth of oxygen dead zones. The average surface temperature of the Indian Ocean exceeds 17 degrees Celsius year-round. But in the Persian Gulf and northern Arabian Sea, summer water temperatures reach 34 to 35 degrees, the temperature of the human body. Literally a warm bath. Sounds pleasant for a vacation? Not for fish. Not for the ecosystem. At those temperatures, oxygen is essentially boiled out of the water, the same way it disappears from a hot cup of tea left sitting too long. Vast zones become virtually dead, uninhabitable for most forms of life. Scientists call these oxygen minimum zones, OMZs. And the Indian Ocean has the largest ones on the planet. The Arabian Sea is one of the worst. The oxygen-depleted zone begins at just 100 to 150 meters depth, nearly at the surface by ocean standards. You could literally dive into crystal-clear, beautiful blue water, descend 200 meters, and find yourself in a lifeless space where there is almost nothing to breathe. No fish, no coral, no jellyfish. Only microbes that learned to live without oxygen 3.5 billion years ago, long before any multicellular organism existed, long before the first fish, long before us. They were there before everything. They will be there after everything. Welcome to an underwater desert in the middle of paradise. Invisible, silent, and for that reason, all the more unsettling. Here is a question, and don't rush to answer with the first thing that comes to mind. What controls the lives of 2 billion people across Asia? Not politicians who get re-elected every few years, not central banks moving interest rates, not technology companies reshaping the world every decade. The monsoon,
Annual, inevitable, ancient as the Himalayas themselves. And it is born right here, over the warmed surface of the Indian Ocean, in an invisible dance of heat, pressure, and the rotation of the planet. Every year from May to June, scorching air over the Indian subcontinent rises, and the ocean literally draws in moist air from the south like a massive pump. A vast atmospheric machine takes shape. Wind blows from ocean to continent, carrying tons of water as vapor, and then unleashes it as rain. Mumbai can receive as much rainfall in a single June day as London gets in an entire year. 600 millimeters of precipitation in 24 hours. That is not poetic exaggeration, that is meteorological fact. Rivers overflow their banks, fields fill with water, rice begins to grow. Cherrapunji in northeastern India, one of the wettest places on the planet, receives up to 11,000 millimeters of rainfall per year, and almost all of it comes from the monsoon. Without it, no harvest. Without harvest, famine. 2 weeks late, and it is already a catastrophe for hundreds of millions of farmers who wait for it with a patience that has no equivalent anywhere else. The Indian Ocean literally decides whether entire civilizations live or die. Every year, without days off. And while meteorologists study satellite images in air-conditioned offices, farmers in Rajasthan look up at the sky, exactly as their grandparents and great-grandparents did 1,000 years ago. Have you ever thought about what actually lies at the bottom of the Indian Ocean? Not pirate treasure, though that's down there too, and we'll get to that. At the bottom lies an entire mountain range that most people have no idea exists. The central Indian Ridge cuts the ocean in half from north to south like a surgical scar, clean and continuous. Its peaks rise 3 kilometers above the seafloor. If the water were gone, you would be looking at mountains taller than the Alps, stretching across an entire hemisphere, the kind of mountains that would inspire legends. But water hides everything. And then there is the Sunda Trench, which almost no one can locate on a map, even though it is one of the most extreme places on Earth. 7,730 meters straight down. That is deeper than a commercial aircraft flies at cruising altitude. Look out the window, and there would still be water beneath you. Pressure down there is 770 times atmospheric. If you descend it without protection, you would be crushed faster than you could register what was happening. Nothing left to identify. Until 2019, not a single person had ever been down there. Nobody. Not once in all of human history, despite the fact that we had already walked on the moon, launched probes beyond the solar system, and sequenced the human genome. And when explorer Victor Vescovo's expedition finally reached the floor of the Sunda Trench, they found a plastic bag. One plastic bag at the bottom of the most inaccessible place in the Indian Ocean. Tell us in the comments, does that surprise you more or devastate you? Genuinely curious. It matters more than it might seem. In the northeastern Indian Ocean, where it flows into the Pacific through thousands of islands and straits, sits the most biologically rich place on Earth, the Coral Triangle. Not the most beautiful, the richest in life of anywhere we know. 6 million square kilometers of reefs, islands, lagoons, and shallow waters. It holds 76% of all coral species on the planet, 37% of all the world's reef fish,
6 of the 7 remaining sea turtle species on Earth, more than 2,000 species of fish. For comparison, the entire Mediterranean has around 500. This is not just beautiful. It is an archive of evolution, a living library of life forms that accumulated over millions of years without our involvement and without our permission. Imagine, you slowly lower yourself into the water with a mask, hear the water fill your ears, and open your eyes. Below you, not sand, not rock. Below you, a city. Alive, buzzing, shimmering with every color nature invented over 500 million years of experimentation. Parrotfish crunch on coral, literally chewing the reef with teeth as hard as stone, and exhaling white sand that eventually becomes the beaches of the Maldives. Every white sand beach is someone's long-digested meal, and now you will think about that every single time. Moray eels lurk in crevices like unfriendly neighbors who peek through the keyhole and never open the door. Octopuses change color and skin texture faster than you scroll through your phone, in 200 milliseconds, quicker than a blink. But here is the contrast that hits like a punch. Over the past 30 years, half the corals in the Indian Ocean have bleached or died. A water temperature rise of 1.5 degrees, and the reef becomes a white graveyard.
Coral does not die instantly. First, it expels the symbiotic algae that gave it color and nutrition, turns transparent, then white, then is covered in green slime, then becomes nothing but a bare limestone skeleton, empty and hollow as a burned forest. This is happening right now, as we speak. 1,200 islands. Average elevation above sea level, 1.5 meters. The lowest lying country on the planet by any absolute measure. The Maldives are not just a resort people visit for Instagram photos of turquoise water and white bungalows over a lagoon. This is a nation of 500,000 people, with its own language, history, cuisine, and culture that is slowly sinking beneath the water. Not metaphorically, literally. The level of the Indian Ocean is rising roughly 3 to 4 millimeters per year, which sounds like nothing, like a measurement error. But over 50 years, that is already 20 centimeters. Add storm surges that temporarily raise the water level by a meter or more. Add waves battering the shore. Add coastal erosion eating away several centimeters of land every year. Already during severe storms, seawater floods roads, seeps into freshwater wells, and undermines house foundations. The Maldivian cabinet held a full government meeting underwater, in wetsuits, with underwater tablets and special waterproof ink, to sign a resolution on the climate threat and draw the world's attention. This was not a stunt for likes. It was a cry for help in the only language everyone would understand, the language of spectacular desperation. You stand on a white sand beach, a warm breeze ruffling your hair, turquoise water stretching to the horizon, soft coral sand beneath your feet, and somewhere inside you understand that your grandchildren may never be able to come here. Not because it will be too expensive, because this place will no longer exist on the map. Every year, the Indian Ocean hosts the greatest show on Earth, one for which no tickets are sold, no sets are built, and no journalists are invited. Humpback whales leave their Antarctic feeding grounds and move toward tropical waters to breed. A route of 8,000 kilometers one way, repeated every year without exception. They do not eat along the way.
They simply swim, burning the fat reserves built up during the Antarctic summer. Blue whales, the largest animals in the history of Earth, not just today, but across all 4 billion years of life on this planet. 30 meters long and 180 tons. That is larger than any dinosaur that ever walked on land. A Tyrannosaurus next to a blue whale is just a large lizard. Blue whales feed here on krill, tiny shrimp-like crustaceans the size of a little finger, and sing songs that travel thousands of kilometers through water without any amplification. Here is a fact that blows the mind every single time. The blue whale's song is so low in frequency, infrasound from 10 to 40 hertz, that the human ear cannot detect it at all. But another blue whale can hear it from up to 1,600 kilometers away. 1,600 kilometers, the distance from Paris to Warsaw. They are literally communicating across an entire ocean, scheduling meetings, announcing their presence, searching for mates, and we stand right there and cannot hear a single word. And while these giants sing their underwater operas in the dark water, oil tankers pass above them. 80% of the world's oil trade moves through the Indian Ocean. The routes intersect at the same latitudes, and it does not always end well for the whale, the sailors, or the water that later carries the oil slick to shore. If you have made it this far and have no desire whatsoever to stop, then you already understand why the Planet Instinct channel exists. Every episode here is exactly this kind of journey. Subscribe right now, so the next film doesn't quietly pass you by in the feed. There is a story rarely told from this angle. From the human side, not from news headlines and reports with naval vessels. In the 1990s, Somalia descended into civil war, one of the longest and most destructive on the African continent. The central government collapsed. Courts shut down. The Coast Guard simply ceased to exist. People went home or joined armed factions. Borders stopped having any practical meaning. And into the coastal waters immediately, as if they had been waiting for exactly this moment, came foreign fishing fleets from Europe, Asia, the Middle East. Enormous industrial trawlers with bottom trawls and nets banned in their own countries because environmental protection laws still work back home. Here, there was no law. They swept the fish clean. Entire populations, entire species, entire ecosystems. Local fishermen, people whose families had lived from the sea for thousands of years, who knew every shoal and current by heart, went out to sea and came back with empty nets. Again and again. Empty nets, empty stomachs, empty futures. Some of them picked up weapons. "We are just protecting our waters," said the first pirates in interviews with journalists. And from the perspective of international law, they were not entirely wrong. They simply had no state, no navy, and no lawyers to prove it through civilized means. By 2011, more than 700 sailors from dozens of countries were simultaneously held captive by Somali pirates. Insurance rates for ships passing through the Gulf of Aden skyrocketed. Global trade was paying billions of dollars per year in security and ransoms. This is not just a criminal story about bad men with Kalashnikovs on speedboats. This is a story about how a destroyed ecosystem, global impunity, and centuries of injustice turn ordinary fishermen into something the world calls monsters. The Indian Ocean is not only about sunsets, sea turtles, and social media photos. Thousands of years before GPS,
before marine chronometers and nautical charts, before the compass and the sextant, Arab sailors regularly crossed the Arabian Sea back and forth every year using nothing but stars, observations of birds, and a deep intuitive knowledge of the monsoons accumulated across generations. They understood what European sailors would only learn after centuries of ships smashed against rocks. From June to September, the wind blows steadily east toward India, reliable and predictable as a train timetable. From November to March, it reverses and blows west, back home toward the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa. Nature had built a two-way trade route across open ocean. You only had to learn to read it and trust it. This two-way road made regular trade possible between Africa, Arabia, India, and China 2,000 years before Europeans knew what a compass was, and 1,500 years before Columbus sailed west hoping to find India. Across these waters traveled spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, that in medieval Europe were worth literally more than gold. A pound of nutmeg in 14th century London could be exchanged for 3 live sheep or half a cow. Silk, cotton, porcelain, ivory, ideas, mathematics, religions. Arabic words still live in the professional language of seafaring worldwide, like the DNA of a vanished civilization. Monsoon, from the Arabic mausim, meaning season. Navigation, from the Arabic nakuda, meaning captain. Admiral, from the Arabic Amir al-Bahr, meaning Lord of the Sea. The ocean created the language the whole world speaks, even those who have never in their lives seen the sea and have no idea it happened. There is a place in the Indian Ocean where even experienced divers with thousands of dives behind them arrive wide-eyed and leave unusually quiet, as if they had seen something too large for words, something that doesn't fit into ordinary conversation. The Seychelles, 115 islands scattered across the ocean like a handful of emeralds tossed casually onto a blue tablecloth. There is not a single volcanic island here. Every single one is granite, ancient fragments of the supercontinent Gondwana that remained jutting above the water after India, Antarctica, and Australia drifted apart 130 million years ago. Granite, nearly 1 billion years old, smooth, rounded, warm to the touch, lies right on the beach, as if someone left it there at the beginning of time. But the real wonder of the Seychelles is not above the water, it is below, in the meadows of seagrass and algae. Dugongs, sea cows weighing up to 400 kilograms, the closest living relatives of elephants, strangely enough, graze in these meadows with the air of creatures that nothing has ever bothered and nothing ever will. They chew grass slowly, thoughtfully, gazing into the middle distance with an expression of complete peace. The same meadow, the same route, every day for decades. Dugongs can live up to 70 years, and they have favorite feeding spots, favorite routes, favorite shallow waters, literal preferences. Scientists have documented this, tracking the same individuals over years. And then there are whale sharks, 12 meters long, a mouth 1.5 meters wide, weighing up to 20 tons, and completely harmless to humans because they feed exclusively on plankton and small fish. You can swim alongside one, place your hand on its rough flank, and this mountain of muscle, cartilage, and millions of years of evolution will simply continue on its unhurried way, paying you absolutely no attention, as if you do not exist.
Wonderful and slightly humbling at the same time, when you realize that to it, You are simply background noise. On March 8, 2014, a Malaysian Airlines aircraft, flight MH370, carrying 239 people, took off from Kuala Lumpur on a routine overnight flight to Beijing. An ordinary flight, hundreds of which cross Asia every night, and vanished. Simply disappeared from air traffic control radars. No distress signal, no final word from the pilots, no explanation, no goodbye. Contact was lost over the South China Sea, but military radars recorded that the plane turned, changed course, and flew for several more hours somewhere south over the Indian Ocean until the fuel ran out. Exactly where, nobody knows to this day. The search, which became the largest in aviation history, stretched for years and covered 120,000 square kilometers of the southern Indian Ocean, an area larger than Germany, swept by towed sonar arrays, autonomous underwater vehicles, and research vessels from multiple countries spending hundreds of millions of dollars. A few fragments of fuselage and wing surfaces were found, washed ashore by ocean currents on the coasts of Mozambique, Réunion, Madagascar. Evidence that the aircraft did indeed go down in the Indian Ocean, but exactly where, nobody knows. The plane itself, its black boxes, the bodies of 239 passengers and crew members, all of it still lies somewhere on the bottom, in absolute darkness, beneath kilometers of cold water, in a place we cannot find. This is the largest unsolved aviation disaster in human history, and it may remain unsolved forever. The Indian Ocean swallowed 239 people and returned not a single answer, not a single line of explanation. That is the scale of the unknown. That is what depth means, not in meters, but in what we still do not know. Even now, with our military satellites, multi-beam sonar, and artificial intelligence, it can simply take something and hide it forever. In 1938, a young curator of a small provincial museum in East London, South Africa, Marjorie Courtney Latimer, received a phone call from a fisherman she knew. "Come down. There's something strange here. I've never seen anything like it." She went to the dock and found a fish 1.5 meters long, covered in heavy bluish-gray scales the size of coins, with short, fleshy, limb-like fins that resembled rudimentary legs. A fish that, according to all scientific records, should have been extinct 65 million years ago, along with the dinosaurs, pterosaurs, mosasaurs, ammonites, and everything else we know only from museum fossils. The coelacanth, a species that survived 5 mass extinctions over 400 million years. A meteorite the size of a small mountain that killed the Tyrannosaurus. Ice ages, climate swings in both directions from tropics to glaciation. Continental drift, which rearranged land and sea like furniture in a room. It lives today at depths of 150 to 700 meters off the coasts of the Comoros, Mozambique, and Sulawesi in Indonesia, moving slowly and unhurriedly through the dark, barely changed, looking at the world with the same eyes it had 400 million years ago, when there was not yet a single tree on land, not a single insect, not a single vertebrate. It has one unique feature that makes it not merely a rare curiosity, but a literal page of our own biography. The coelacanth moves its fins in alternating pairs, left front, and right rear simultaneously, exactly as in walking. That is precisely how you and I walk, how dogs and horses and all four-limbed animals move. Scientists believe that from this movement, from this fin mechanics, our own way of walking developed 375 million years ago, when the first creatures resembling the coelacanth crawled ashore and discovered that the world was far larger than it had seemed from underwater. Look at a coelacanth, and you are looking at your ancestor. Not metaphorically, literally. Beneath the Indian Ocean, fire burns. And this is not a metaphor or a poetic image. It literally burns. The mid-ocean ridges that cut across the ocean floor are dotted with hydrothermal vents, black smokers, as scientists call them. These are cracks in the sea floor through which water superheated by magma to 350 to 400 degrees erupts, temperatures at which lead melts. It carries with it sulfur compounds, iron, manganese, copper, a dark, churning column rising into the cold, deep water like smoke from a factory chimney, only 2 to 3 kilometers below the surface. You might think, at such temperatures, such pressure, in total darkness, with no oxygen and no sunlight, who could possibly live there? Everyone. Everything you can imagine lives there. Tube worms, Riftia pachyptilla, 2 meters long, which do not eat in any conventional sense. They have no mouth, no stomach. They synthesize energy from chemical reactions with hydrogen sulfide, the way plants synthesize it from sunlight. This is called chemosynthesis, and it is another way of existing on this planet that we did not know about until 1977. White yeti crabs, covered in long, fluffy hair on their claws that host entire colonies of chemosynthetic bacteria. The crab literally carries a farm on its own body, cultivates bacteria, and then eats them. Octopuses, fish with enormous eyes, bizarre mollusks with shells reinforced with iron. Entire ecosystems that have never seen sunlight, do not need it, and have existed for millions of years, completely independent of everything else, a parallel biosphere within our own. This overturns everything we thought we knew about the nature of life and the conditions under which it is possible. We assumed, it was an axiom, a foundational principle of biology, without sunlight, there is no life. The Indian Ocean says, no. Life finds a way. It always finds a way, through any crack, at any temperature, in any darkness, under any pressure. That is perhaps the most important lesson this ocean has to teach us. The Indian Ocean is one of the key participants in the global climate system that scientists poetically call the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, or thermohaline circulation. Cold, dense, salty water sinks near Antarctica. Warm, tropical water moves south to replace it. Currents carry heat from the tropics toward the poles, like a giant planetary heating system that has been running without interruption for millions of years. Without this mechanism, without these invisible underwater rivers, London would be colder than Moscow in January. Scandinavia would be frozen tundra, unsuitable for farming or dense settlement. All of Northern Europe as we know it today, with its forests, fields, cities, ports, and civilization, exists only because the warm waters of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans carry their heat there. The El Niño Southern Oscillation phenomenon is directly linked to the surface temperature of the Indian Ocean. When it warms abnormally, a chain reaction spreads across the entire planet. drought and wildfires in Australia, catastrophic floods in East Africa, failed wheat harvests in India, abnormal heat in Brazil, torrential rains in California after years of drought. One ocean and a wave of consequences rolls around the entire globe like ripples from a stone dropped in the center of a pond. Scientists are only beginning to truly understand how precisely calibrated this climate machine is, how complex and interdependent all its parts are, and how easy it is to throw it out of balance. Turns out, a few tenths of a degree in the right place is more than enough.
8 million tons of plastic enter the world's oceans every year. 8 million tons. As if every single minute, around the clock, 7 days a week, a fully loaded garbage truck was being tipped into the water. Right now, while you are reading this, some of that plastic settles on the floor of the Sunda Trench at the maximum depth of the Indian Ocean, unreachable without specialized equipment costing tens of millions of dollars. Down there lie bags, bottles, packaging, untouched, because the bacteria capable of breaking down plastic are only now beginning to evolve. Some of it becomes microplastic, particles smaller than a millimeter that look like food to plankton. Plankton eats them. Then fish eat the plankton along with the plastic. Then we eat the fish. Yes, there is microplastic in your blood right now, confirmed by studies published in 2022 in several peer-reviewed scientific journals. This is not a hypothesis from environmental activists. This is laboratory analysis of blood samples taken from ordinary people in multiple countries. In the Indian Ocean, there is no obvious garbage island like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. No compact, visible mass you can photograph from a drone, show on the news, and be horrified by. Here, the waste is dispersed everywhere, dissolved, broken down to particles invisible to the naked eye, eaten and redistributed through food chains. The Indian Ocean digests our filth quietly, without scandal, without press conferences or protest signs, silently, methodically. And perhaps that is the most disturbing part. When a catastrophe unfolds without a sound, when there is nothing to point at and say, there it is. Think about this and write in the comments, have you ever wondered where the plastic bottle thrown into a city river ends up? Where the bag that blew off the balcony goes? Because the answer is right in front of you. It is the Indian Ocean. It is what you are consuming in the fish on your plate at dinner. Réunion, Mauritius, the Comoros. None of these islands are fragments of some ancient sunken continent. No shards of Atlantis. They grew from volcanoes straight off the ocean floor, layer by layer, eruption by eruption, millimeter by millimeter, until they broke the surface and saw the sun. Réunion sits on a hotspot, a mantle plume, a column of superheated magma burning through the tectonic plate from below, the way a hot rod burns through a sheet of paper. The plate moves north at a rate of a few centimeters per year, while the magma column stays in place. The result is a chain of volcanic islands, each one farther north and older than the last, like tick marks on a ruler of geological time. Piton de la Fournaise volcano on Réunion is one of the most active on Earth. It erupts on average once every 9 months, almost on schedule.
Dark basalt lava flows slowly down the slopes, reaches the shore, and plunges into the ocean, hissing, exploding into steam and clouds of volcanic glass. New land is being born before your eyes, literally live, right now, while you watch this film. Mauritius, Réunion's neighbor, the island is already 8 million years old, long since extinct, cooled, layered with volcanic soil of extraordinary fertility, then covered in jungle, then beaches with that famous white coral sand, and tourists with cocktails by the pool. Réunion is still young, hot, unsettled. It does not yet know what it will become in 1,000,000 years. And 100 kilometers beneath both of them, the hotspot continues its work without breaks, without weekends, and without our knowledge. The next island is already in the process of forming. It just hasn't reached the surface yet. Still an underwater mountain, still waiting. In the south, the Indian Ocean meets Antarctica. And here, in this cold and almost uninhabited place, something happens that is of fantastic importance to the entire planet. Cold Antarctic water, dense and saturated with oxygen to its limit. Oxygen dissolves better in cold water, like gas in a cold drink. Slowly sinks and flows north as an underwater river, running beneath another current in the opposite direction by its own rules, invisible from the surface. It carries oxygen and dissolved nutrients to equatorial depths, where otherwise nothing would exist but oxygen desert and dead silence. This is upwelling in action, the process by which deep, cold, mineral-rich water rises to the warm surface. Where it occurs intensively, life erupts with such force that the water is barely visible through the fish. Plankton divides every few hours, turning the water a deep emerald green. Sardines gather in schools the size of a small city. In South Africa, this phenomenon is known as the sardine run, and it is one of the greatest natural spectacles on Earth. After them come tuna, dolphins, sharks, whales, birds. The entire food pyramid assembles for the feast. The east coast of Africa, from Kenya to Mozambique, from Somalia to Tanzania, lives on this upwelling. Without it, no fish. Without fish, no fishermen. Without fishermen, no port cities would have grown. Without cities, no trade routes. Without trade routes, none of the East African civilization that has existed for thousands of years. Antarctica freezes and melts on its own schedule, and by that single breath, the entire Indian Ocean lives from pole to equator, from surface to floor.
On the shores of Bangladesh, Myanmar, India, Mozambique, and Madagascar, stands a strange forest that looks wrong at first glance, a violation of the normal order of things. Trees with no lower branches, only roots instead. Hundreds of curved, arching roots jutting out of salt water at every angle, intertwining, plunging back into the earth and rising again, like the legs of a giant insect that decided to freeze forever mid-step at the tide's edge. These are mangroves, and they save more human lives than any army, any wall, or any dam. During the 2004 tsunami, large-scale studies conducted by teams from multiple universities produced a clear and unambiguous picture. Coastal villages protected by intact mangrove forests suffered significantly less damage, fewer deaths, fewer destroyed homes than neighboring stretches of coastline where the mangroves had been cleared for beach hotels, aquaculture farms, and rice paddies.
A mangrove is a living wall that does not break under the force of a wave. It bends, disperses, absorbs. Roots absorb the wave by breaking it into thousands of smaller flows. Branches slow the wind. Leaves filter suspended particles from the water. The root system holds the shoreline against erosion. And in this tangle of interlocking roots and salt water lives an entire separate world that rarely gets its own documentary. Crocodiles drifting between the trees at high tide with the air of landlords, because that is exactly what they are. Mudskippers, small fish with muscular pectoral fins that can haul themselves out of the water, crawl across mud, climb roots, and breathe through moist skin. Living proof of how fish once came ashore. Pink flamingos standing knee-deep in murky water with the bearing of aristocrats forced to live in a swamp. And yes, real Bengal tigers.
Tigers that swim between mangrove islands covering several kilometers through open water, hunting spotted deer and fish in the Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest straddling the border of India and Bangladesh, covering 10,000 square kilometers. Tigers in the water, among the trees, in the Indian Ocean. The first humans crossed the Indian Ocean roughly 50,000 years ago, from Africa toward Australia, along a chain of islands and open water crossings that would be a serious navigational challenge even today. On rafts of bamboo or lashed together logs, without maps, without compasses, without navigation instruments, without life jackets, without radio, and without the ability to turn back if anything went wrong. Only stars overhead, the color of the water below, the direction of the wind, and a ferocious determination to move toward a place no human had ever set foot. This ocean crossing of thousands of kilometers is one of the grandest and least celebrated adventures in the history of our species. One we will never know in detail because they left no records, only genes in the blood of Aboriginal Australians. The Portuguese discovered the sea route to India in 1498. Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope, crossed the Arabian Sea, and reached Calicut on the Malabar coast, returning with holds packed with pepper and cinnamon worth a fortune in Lisbon. Europe celebrated. History teaches us this was a discovery. But the final decisive leg of the journey from the East African coast to India was navigated for da Gama by an Arab pilot named Ahmad ibn Majid, because he had known these waters for millennia and could guide any ship through them blindfolded. Discovery is always a two-way affair. One arrives for the first time, the other has long been home. Today, goods worth more than $12 trillion pass through the Indian Ocean every year. Oil from the Persian Gulf warming homes in Europe and Japan. Containers from China carrying phones, clothing, electronics. Liquefied natural gas from Qatar and Australia. Cars, medicine, grain. Literally everything that drives the world economy in the 21st century passes through this water, along the same routes laid down by Arab, Indian, and Malay sailors 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. There is something that documentary films rarely talk about, because it cannot properly be filmed. You can only experience it in person, standing on the shore. In the night hours, off the shores of the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and some islands along the East African coast, the water begins to glow. Blue. Not a dim blue, not a hint of blue, brightly, almost electrically, like a neon sign dissolved into the ocean. You walk along the water's edge, and every step leaves a glowing print in the wet sand that slowly fades behind you. Waves roll onto the shore and ignite blue along their entire length, from one end to the other, then fade. Then the next ones ignite. It feels as if the living screen beneath you is breathing and responding to every movement, every step in the water, every sweep of an arm. This is bioluminescence. Noctiluca scintillans, dinoflagellates, and other single-celled organisms that emit light in response to mechanical disturbance. The evolutionary function, to startle a predator that has come too close with a sudden flash. They do not know they are beautiful. They do not know that thousands of people specifically fly to the other end of the earth and pay considerable sums for a hotel on the right stretch of beach just to spend one night in their light. They are simply defending themselves, as they have learned to do over hundreds of millions of years. And this accidental, unintentional, completely indifferent to us glow is one of the most beautiful phenomena nature produces. The Indian Ocean has a way of making you stop and forget everything all at once. The tsunami and the plastic, the pirates and the climate, the price of flights and the unread messages on your phone. You stand knee-deep in glowing water, stars overhead, blue fire beneath your feet, and understand one simple thing. The planet didn't invite you here, but it's glad you came.
70% of Earth's surface is covered by water, and we have still explored less than 20% of the ocean floor. That is not poetic exaggeration. It is official data from the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. We have mapped the Moon to a resolution of a few meters, Mars too. We know our own ocean less well than we know neighboring planets. The Indian Ocean, alive, breathing, unpredictable, fierce and tender at the same time, ancient and constantly changing, continues to exist by its own rules, which were established long before we appeared and do not require our approval. It has been here for 140 million years, since Gondwana broke apart and the waters filled the space between drifting continents. It survived the collision of India with Asia, which raised the Himalayas, the highest mountains on the planet, right before its eyes. It survived 5 mass extinctions, when life on Earth each time started over almost from scratch. It survived ice ages, when its level dropped 120 meters and exposed vast continental shelves that people walked across. It will survive us if we prove foolish enough to keep destroying what keeps us alive. Or it will remain beside us for the next millions of years, if we are wise enough to stop in time while there is still something worth stopping for. This is not an abstract call to protect nature, printed in small type under a pretty photo of a sea turtle in a travel brochure. This is simple, hard, no exceptions arithmetic. Half the oxygen you are breathing right now, at this very second reading these words, is produced by oceanic phytoplankton. Not the Amazon rainforest, as people like to say at environmental conferences, but microscopic algae and cyanobacteria floating in the upper layers of the world's ocean. Kill the ocean, and within a few generations, there will be nothing left to breathe. Not metaphorically, not figuratively. Literally, nothing to breathe. The Indian Ocean is not a backdrop to our civilization, not a pretty backdrop for vacation photos. It is a condition of our existence, one of the very few that are truly irreplaceable. Here is how a cyclone is born, step by step, inevitable as a well-written tragedy. Warm water, above 26 degrees, that is a non-negotiable requirement,
evaporates from the surface. Hot, moist vapor rises. At altitude, it cools and condenses into clouds, releasing heat, and that heat drives the updraft even faster. The atmosphere around this column begins to spin, driven by Earth's rotation, the Coriolis force, the same one that determines which way water spirals in a drain. Slowly at first, like a faint wisp of steam above a cup of hot tea on a cold windowsill, barely noticeable, almost accidental. Then faster. Then winds at 150, 200, 250 kilometers per hour. Waves 15 meters high, a wall of water and air that sweeps away everything built below the third floor. And this monster crawls toward the shore, gathering strength over hot water, like a boxer warming up before the final round, knowing no one can stop him. Cyclone Idai in March 2019 brought winds of 195 kilometers per hour to the coast of Mozambique. 1,300 people died. An entire city, Beira, home to 500,000 people, was destroyed in a single night. Roofs blown off, roads washed away, every tree stripped down, every basement flooded. Cyclone Nargis in May 2008 killed 140,000 people in Myanmar in a matter of hours. It came at night, swept through the Irrawaddy Delta where millions of people lived, and left behind something that is difficult to put into words. And all of it is fed by the heat of the Indian Ocean. The warmer the water, the more vicious the cyclone. The longer it lives, the farther it reaches, the higher its category on the Saffir-Simpson scale. And the water keeps getting warmer. Every decade, a few more hundredths of a degree. A tiny, almost laughable number, with consequences that are no longer abstract.
They have already happened. They are already in the archives.
If this film made you look at water differently, not as a beautiful background for photographs, and not as an abstract nature to protect for some vague moral reason, but as a living thing with its own character, history, memory, and rules that matter more than any plan we make, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. On the Planet Instinct channel, this is what we do every episode. We take something that seems distant, abstract, and too enormous to fit inside the mind, and bring it close enough that you can almost feel the salt wind on your face and hear the silence ringing 2 kilometers down. The next episode is already waiting for you. Subscribe so it doesn't slip past unnoticed in an endless feed of other people's content.
Imagine a place where the thermometer drops to negative 89 degrees Celsius. That is not an exaggeration. That exact temperature was recorded at the Soviet Vostok station in 1983, and that record has never been broken. A place where winds exceed 300 kilometers per hour, powerful enough to knock a fully suited person off their feet and drag them into the darkness. Where the sun stays above the horizon for months at a time, and then disappears entirely for months after that. Antarctica, the coldest, driest, most remote continent on Earth. You're watching Planet Instinct, and today we've reached the very bottom of the world. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Moscow, Tokyo, or maybe from a ship somewhere out in the middle of the ocean. We've made it to the South Pole, and soon we'll be heading north again. Don't miss the next episode. Subscribe right now, because our next stop is going to be just as extraordinary. Let's go. Antarctica is not just a very cold place. It is a world unto itself, operating by rules that have nothing to do with anything we consider normal.
The continent covers roughly 14 million square kilometers, and yet Antarctica is a desert, a real one. It receives less precipitation than the Sahara. In the interior, less than 50 millimeters of snow falls per year. That snow never melts. It accumulates over thousands of years, compressing into ice nearly 5 kilometers thick. Beneath that ice shield lies roughly 70% of all the fresh water on Earth. If all the Antarctic ice were to melt, global sea levels would rise by approximately 60 meters. London, New York, Tokyo, Shanghai, all of them underwater. This is not a science fiction scenario. This is basic physics. And yet, life exists here. Nowhere else on the planet does the will to live assert itself with such raw, unapologetic force. Beneath the ice, scientists have discovered subglacial lakes, including Lake Vostok, where microorganisms may have been isolated from the outside world for millions of years. Researchers believe that studying life in these conditions could help answer one of humanity's greatest questions: could life exist on other planets? Antarctica is not just a continent. It is a key to understanding life in the universe, and we are only just beginning to turn it. Antarctica runs on a schedule that the human mind struggles to process. At the height of summer, from November through January, the sun never sets. In some regions, there is no sunset for nearly 4 months straight. With the arrival of spring, daylight grows by 20 minutes every single day, until sunrise and sunset finally merge into one unbroken polar day. In winter, the reverse happens completely. The sun disappears for months, plunging the continent into absolute darkness. The first sunrise after winter on the Ross Ice Shelf is one of the most moving sights on the planet. On that day, the sun stays above the horizon for just over an hour. But that single hour is enough. It is a signal to every living thing. The world has come back to life. With the return of light, Antarctica undergoes an extraordinary transformation. The sea ice surrounding the continent begins to break apart. Colossal icebergs, some the size of small countries, calve off from glaciers and drift into the open ocean. In the year 2000, iceberg B-15 broke away from the Ross Ice Shelf, covering roughly 11,000 square kilometers, the largest iceberg ever recorded. It drifted for more than 17 years. In autumn, the process reverses. Up to 50,000 square kilometers of new sea ice form in a single day. Within weeks, the total area of Antarctica, ice shelf included, nearly doubles from 14 to almost 30 million square kilometers. This is the largest seasonal transformation on the surface of our planet. The change of seasons in Antarctica is not just a shift in temperature. It is a full system reboot, one that every living creature on the continent depends on completely. Those who aren't ready when it happens don't survive. Here, hesitation is fatal. Is there a more dedicated father anywhere on the planet than the emperor penguin? Probably not. After laying a single egg, the female heads to the ocean for several months to feed and recover. The male stays behind, alone, with the egg balanced on his feet, tucked under a warm fold of skin. Outside, the temperature can plunge to negative 50 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds reach 100 kilometers per hour. Complete darkness. Not a single ray of light. Not a crumb of food. To survive, thousands of males huddle together in a tight, living mass, what scientists call a huddle. Inside that huddle, the temperature holds steady at around 20 degrees above zero, a difference of 70 degrees from the outside air. And the huddle doesn't stand still. It rotates slowly and continuously, cycling each bird through the warm center and the freezing outer edge. This is not chaos. It is a precisely organized rotation system. And research shows that every penguin spends roughly the same amount of time on the exposed edge. Fairness, enforced with mathematical precision. The males incubate their eggs for up to 75 days. During that entire time, they eat nothing. By the time the chick hatches, the father has lost nearly half his body weight. But the chick is hungry, and somehow the father finds the strength. His body produces a special secretion, sometimes called penguin milk, rich in protein and fat. If emperor penguins impress with endurance, Adelie penguins impress with sheer determination. Over the course of 1 year, an Adelie penguin travels roughly 13,000 kilometers from winter feeding grounds to summer nesting sites and back. That is one of the longest annual migrations of any bird on Earth. And these penguins make that journey both swimming and waddling, sliding on their bellies across the ice when needed. In the water, they reach speeds of 27 kilometers per hour, fast enough to outrun most of their predators. Their destination? Rocky outcrops that poke above the ice. They cannot nest on ice. Eggs must rest on a solid surface above the meltwater. Most pairs return every year to the same spot, the same rock, the same partner. Pair fidelity among Adelie penguins runs at roughly 90%, one of the highest rates of any animal. Some colonies have nested in the same location for more than 2,000 years, confirmed by studying sediment layers of compacted guano beneath the ice. But getting to that point involves serious drama. Nests are built from pebbles, and pebbles are in desperately short supply. That's where things get interesting. Stealing pebbles from a neighbor's nest is completely standard practice. The technique is brazen. Approach a neighboring nest, wait for the owner to look away, grab the stone. Scientists have even documented cases of females exchanging attention with a male neighbor for a pebble. Antarctic currency at its most literal. Chicks hatch after 35 days. The parents must then make foraging trips of up to 200 kilometers each, repeatedly, until the chick grows large enough to fend for itself. And at the ice edge, every single time, something is waiting. A leopard seal, a killer whale. The penguins know this. They go anyway, again and again. The Weddell seal is the only wild mammal that stays near the Antarctic coast all year round. It doesn't fly south. It doesn't migrate. It doesn't look for somewhere warmer. It stays. And its survival secret is both simple and brilliant. It lives under the water. The temperature of the Antarctic Sea never drops below -2 degrees Celsius. Under pressure, the water doesn't freeze. On the surface at the same time, it can be -50, a 48-degree difference. For the Weddell seal, the ocean isn't a danger zone, it's a heated home. Weddell seals hold the record for the deepest dives among all seals. They can descend to more than 700 meters and hold their breath for up to 82 minutes. For comparison, world-class freediving athletes struggle to hold their breath for 5 to 8 minutes. During a dive, the seal slows its heart rate from 80 beats per minute to as few as 5. directing oxygen only to the organs that absolutely need it. This is a physiological marvel, refined over millions of years. But there is a catch. The breathing hole through which the seal dives is constantly trying to freeze over. Water in Antarctica ices up fast, so males must continuously maintain their breathing holes, gnawing through the ice with their teeth. Over time, their teeth wear down to the point where older males can no longer hunt effectively. For the summer feast, more than 30,000 humpback whales arrive. Each one can consume over a ton of food per day. Humpbacks are masters of cooperative hunting. They create bubble nets, rising in a spiral from depth while exhaling streams of air. The fish have no idea the trap is closing. They pack tighter and tighter into a dense ball, right above the open mouths below. Then, the giant mouths snap open in near-perfect synchrony. This maneuver requires precise coordination between multiple whales. They spend years learning it, and they pass the technique down to their young. Humpbacks also sing, and their songs can last up to 20 hours without stopping. Males change their melody every season, and every individual in the population gradually adopts the new version. That is culture, pure and simple. The killer whale is not simply a predator. It is intelligence wrapped in a black and white hull. The largest member of the dolphin family reaches 9 meters in length and weighs up to 10 tons. Males live up to 60 years. Females live up to 90. Female killer whales are one of the very few creatures on Earth, alongside humans and pilot whales, that live long past their reproductive years. Menopause in killer whales occurs at around 40 years of age. Scientists believe that older females, the grandmothers of the pod, pass down irreplaceable hunting knowledge to younger members. Pods that lose their elder females hunt noticeably less effectively. Antarctic killer whales have developed hunting techniques that are passed from generation to generation as cultural traditions. Some pods specialize in seals. Several whales work together to generate a wave up to half a meter high, washing a seal clean off its ice floe. Then, once the seal is in the water, they strike it with their tails to disorient it. This technique takes months to learn. Young killer whales train under the supervision of older ones. Other pods hunt fish, using tail strikes at speeds of 48 meters per second. That's 170 kilometers per hour. One strike can stun more than a dozen fish at once. Killer whales communicate through a complex system of clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls. Each pod has its own dialect, one that killer whales from other groups cannot understand. Research shows they can mimic unfamiliar sounds, including human speech. The killer whale brain is surpassed in size only by the elephant and a few larger whale species. In Antarctica, that intelligence operates at full capacity because competition for food is fierce and conditions shift constantly. The smarter you are, the more you eat. Simple as that. Antarctica is not all heartwarming penguins and majestic whales. It has a darker side, and it is every bit as gripping. Skuas are large seabirds with a wingspan of up to 140 centimeters. They fly to Antarctica specifically for the penguin breeding season. In winter, they live somewhere further north, eating fish. But with the arrival of the Antarctic summer, they become ruthless opportunists. Skuas are among the most aggressive and intelligent birds on the planet. They don't just attack penguin chicks. They hunt in coordinated pairs with surgical precision. One skua distracts the adult penguin, provoking it, teasing it, drawing it away. The second one snatches the chick. A pair that has practiced this technique can clear a section of a colony in minutes. Some skua groups spend the entire summer feeding almost exclusively on eggs and chicks. Fish become an afterthought. The leopard seal operates on an entirely different level. It is a solitary hunter, the second largest seal in Antarctica after the elephant seal. Body length up to 3.5 meters, weight up to 600 kilograms. Its jaws open at nearly 180 degrees, and its 3-cusped back teeth can both grip prey and filter krill. A true all-purpose predator. It waits at the edge of the ice for hours, motionless beneath the surface. The penguins pace nervously at the edge of the floe, none willing to jump first. This is why they jump in groups. Statistically, the odds of being the target go down in a crowd. The first one in takes the greatest risk, but the one who never jumps at all starves to death. That is the choice. Nothing more complicated than that. What happens beneath the surface of Antarctica's waters is something scientists have barely begun to understand, and every new discovery is more astonishing than the last. The Antarctic continental shelf is one of the least explored regions of the world's oceans. Deep-sea submersibles have descended here only dozens of times, and every time they surfaced, they came back with findings that rewrote the biology textbooks. Life exists here that exists nowhere else on Earth. Giant sea spiders, pycnogonids, reach 70 centimeters across, while their relatives in warmer waters barely reach 1 centimeter. This is known as polar gigantism. In cold water, metabolism slows, oxygen dissolves more readily, and some invertebrates grow to monstrous proportions. Ice fish, the notothenioids, are the only vertebrates on the planet with no hemoglobin in their blood. Their blood is literally transparent. Instead of red blood cells, they rely on an enlarged heart and wider blood vessels to pump a greater volume of blood. Evolution found a way. Even a drifting iceberg leaves life in its wake. As it breaks off from the glacier and moves into open water, it plows along the ocean floor, crushing sea urchins, anemones, and starfish. Catastrophic, it seems. But those crushed organisms become food for hundreds of other creatures that converge on the scene. An iceberg is a floating feast. Scientists have found that zooplankton concentrations around icebergs are 5 to 10 times higher than in the surrounding water. And beneath the iceberg itself, unique communities of organisms, adapted to total darkness and extreme cold, make their home. Antarctica still holds thousands of secrets. Most of them won't be unlocked for decades. The sun returns to Antarctica, and life on this strange continent begins another cycle. Living here is not a struggle for survival. It is a celebration of life against all odds.
And that is what makes Antarctica the most extraordinary, most mysterious, and most humbling place on our planet. We're glad you made this journey with us, all the way to the edge of the Earth. Subscribe to Planet Instinct. Our next journey is already underway. And that's it. 5 oceans behind us. Thousands of miles of water, depths where not a single ray of light ever reaches. Creatures that look like nature's mistakes, but are in fact her greatest masterpieces. Storms that snap ships like matchsticks. A dead calm so still it mirrors the entire sky. we've circled the planet. And you know what the most remarkable thing is? We barely know anything. 95% of the ocean floor remains unexplored, which means that somewhere down there, in the darkness several kilometers below, something is happening right now that humanity hasn't even begun to imagine. New species, new ecosystems, perhaps answers to questions we haven't thought to ask yet. The ocean doesn't need our admiration. It existed billions of years before us and, in all likelihood, will outlast every single one of us. But it absolutely deserves our respect and our attention, because a planet without oceans is just a rock. With them, it's life. If this episode gave you that feeling, the one where you stare at the horizon and realize the world is infinitely bigger than it seems, leave a like. It's the best way to say thank you without saying a single word. And drop a comment below. Which ocean impressed you the most? The Pacific with its sheer scale? The Southern with its fury? Or the Arctic with its frozen silence? I'm genuinely curious. Seriously. Subscribe. There's still so much of this planet worth seeing. Until next time.